You're in the Classroom with Cat Vo. In the Classroom is a podcast where we talk about all things teaching and learning, education and research. Join me as I sit down with everyday educators and explore what's going on in the field and what this means for sustaining us as teachers in the classroom. If you want to be on the podcast, feel free to reach out to me at intheclassroom.com.au. Today's special guest is Professor Sarah Prestridge. Sarah brings over 30 years of experience to teaching as a researcher, university educator, and teacher in the field of educational technologies. Her passion for classroom technology integration has seen her lead schools in innovation for learning. She's at the forefront of cutting-edge research, having been awarded the Australians 2025 Top of Field Scholar for Teaching and Teacher Education. We're so excited to have her on the podcast today and hope you find it insightful for your own practice. Alrighty, welcome to Sarah Prestridge. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today.
Pleasure.
I always start off the podcast with a story of how I met the guest. So I have to retell this one and I'm really excited to tell everyone about it. So it happened about 2 years ago. I don't know what you remember, Sarah, but it was 2 years ago and we were invited to the speakers dinner the night before the Griffith Summit at the Hilton. And I walked into this room thinking, oh my goodness, I know absolutely no one. And who are they going to put me with? Because I am so scared. I don't know anyone in this room. And then I sat down next to you and it was just the most loveliest conversation that we had. You introduced yourself to me. You were telling me all about your research and your work, and you were really excited about what I was doing in the classroom. So yeah, what have you been working on, Sarah? Like even before that, I think, how did you even get into this space of teaching, researching? Like what's the journey been like for you?
It all started, I was a primary school teacher and I always had a fascination, actually. I did, at the same time I was initially teaching, I thought I'd continue on a master's. There were two big things in the area at the time. Now, this is back in the early 90s, like really early 90s, maybe could have been late 80s, languages and computers. And I knew I wasn't any good at learning a language, so I had to do a master's in computers because I was thinking that's going to be the next best thing. And I was right, like computers permeated our education system. But the thing that I learned very early on was that how I understood them was different when I worked with children. So as a primary school teacher, you're very into what the child needs at point in time. So I was working in a school in Logan and I had a 2-6 composite class. And it was a really interesting mix of students. We had a wonderful, classroom climate, but I had this clunky old big computer and everyone else was kind of putting it to the back of the classroom. So I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put it in the front, right at the front of the classroom, and we're going to do some stuff with it. And we were learning about medieval times. And I thought, I'm in Logan. These kids haven't seen a castle, let alone the children. And I could show them a book, but there's got to be more to it than that. So what I did was found an old floppy disk that had a medieval simulation on it. So I put that in and I put 2 kids strategically, because I wanted to hear what they were talking about, together with this simulation. And I could hear, oh, go that way, go down around that corner. Oh, look, now we're in the market. Whoa, let's go up that alleyway. Let's do this. And they were talking about being within medieval times. So it related to them. And I thought to myself, here's the link. Here's why I would use technology, because it helps the students conceptualize what they're learning about. So I always knew it was about that. When we had that first influence of technologies in schools, a lot of teachers and a lot of schools went for tutoring programs, like, the old Mass Blaster or the reading words where you actually, put in at cat, at mat, that sort of type of tutorial program. And I knew that wasn't where the joy of using technology was. I knew it was in providing environments for students to explore and construct understandings themselves. So I chose technologies and the way to use technologies, and have always done that based on that very first exploration of medieval class environments with kids back in Logan in the early 90s. So that premised choices that I make, which tools I choose and why I choose them. And I simply say to teachers some golden rules that help with thinking about effective use of technology. One is put the technology in the student hand, remove it from the teacher and put it where learning happens. Because if you put it where learning happens, you're more likely to enable the green pasture of learning. If you put it with the teacher controls it and owns the technology. That's not where you want. That's not where the learning is. So that's a really important thing. When we saw the introduction of interactive whiteboards, I would say to schools, hey, rip that thing off the wall and put it on the floor. Make sure the kids are using it. Where is it that the children are actually doing it? Because it ended up becoming the latest Blackboard. Like, it literally just transferred the same kind of practices of what we have historically done with blackboards on the whiteboard, instead of redesigning the learning environment and putting it where the children were, so I've always considered choosing technology that orientates to exploration, to discussion. So I often put two children together with the technology instead of one-to-one, because it's in the deconstruction and the discussion of the idea where the learning happens, not in that sort of interaction. It's more in what we're talking about and how we explain it to each other. And, oh, did you do this? Did you do this? That's the active part of learning. So I have always just explored different ways of using technologies, and that then transpired to ways I understand learning online. So when we shifted during the COVID period to online, the first response is to look at, okay, well, what was happening in the classroom? You just kind of did that online instead of thinking about the online environment as pretty much an orange compared to the apple of what happens in a classroom. So you actually have to design the interaction differently, and you actually have to design for interaction, not delivery. So if you have the golden rule of designing for interactivity and engagement, then you choose the different tools online in different ways. So you'll choose asynchronous tools where students can be part of that critical conversation in discussion forums at any point in time, compared to a synchronous delivery, which kind of orientates to the teacher more because they're delivering. So the technology matters, and how you actually use the technology in any kind of space or place.
Before we went into that COVID stage, I think you mentioned something really interesting about putting the learning and the technology with the student, not with the teacher. I just want to unpack that a bit more with you in terms of like, how do we do that? Because like for someone like me, like I've grown up and my generation has been like teacher facilitated technology. Like, here's a Kahoot, you log on and sure, you do the quiz, but it's always been that teacher kind of directed like form of tech in that sense. I'm not sure if I'm interpreting that correctly, or how do we get students, I guess, just like engaging with technology rather than us teachers telling them or assuming that they know how to engage, if that makes sense.
There's two parts to that. It's students need to be taught how to use it. There's definitely modeling and part of that, but there's also the reasoning behind it as well. Why I'm using it this way. Because when you use it in the way you've described, it is familiar to both the teacher and the children, because it orientates to what we call a classroom context. So in a classroom, you have the dominant teacher, regardless of trying to shift that. The teacher, we have conformed children to actually learn with, maybe lining up, walking in, sitting beside the same kid for a whole year in science. And this is what I understand learning to be, with that interaction and the teacher leading the way. So, to a degree, we actually have to disrupt that to be able to think about how we can learn with the technology differently. So, for your question there, you're asking, how do we actually get them to learn so it's not dominated by the teacher, so it's more a discursive, co-constructive environment? So to do that, one of the hardest spaces to do that is online. Often we go straight to what the classroom looks like and we put that online, which is a synchronous space. I'll deliver to you, like I said before. But if you change that to a discussion forum where you frame it up and you actually say, okay, I want you to, in a groups of 3 or 4, I want you to discuss this idea and contribute what you want to contribute in the bigger discussion, so you can have multiple discussions open. You're creating a network of learning. Now, that is actually what learning online is. It's networked learning. The teacher can't be the dominant. The teacher is a co-participant in that. They're the ones who, which is I'm going to say the QUT lady academic who's fantastic. Her name is Erica McWilliams, and I refer to her, even though she's the blue team and I'm the red team from Griffith. She came up with a wonderful term. You remember the sage on the sage and the guide on the side that we talked about forever? Well, in a digital space, she talks about the meddler in the middle. It's that person who just teases out the idea. Tell me a little bit more about that. Joe said this. What did you think, Andrew? Andrew, could you respond back to Sarah? And trying to get this conversation, this critical conversation, you can actually meddle with it. You can't do that in a classroom as well, because your position is a more dominant position. But if you use a technology like an asynchronous space, it creates that open network environment, and you actually can build students' skills to be constructive in that space. So the technology, if you use it in ways that actually orientate to thinking about, co-construction and critical thinking, you can design it for that, but you got to choose the right technology. It's harder to do that sort of type of work in an asynchronous space. It orientates to the teacher too much. So you want to shift it out. Same with the idea of like the OneNotes, the Microsoft OneNotes compared to the open sort of Teams discussion area. So the OneNote orientates to your content repository type of thing, which were our e-textbooks or our textbooks or our worksheets sort of type of thing. But where the learning happens is the activity is all in that sort of interactive space. So that's where you're trying to create the activity. So you're choosing the technology for the activity. You're actually saying to students, this, and the way you're responding here, you bring it into the classroom and go, look, last night Joe popped on. He said this. What did you think about that? See how he came back and he actually said that great idea. So you don't just leave it in the ether, but you bring it as this nuance between what's happening in the classroom and what's happening online. So they're learning how to do that and why it's important to actually respond and not just get a like.
I think you're just changing my whole understanding of digital technologies, like pedagogies right now. I feel like it's always been an afterthought for me, but it shouldn't, because that is like the power of online learning is the kind of space that you can create, and the technology allows you to facilitate the conditions of learning. I've never thought of it from that point of view. It's always just been, oh, what can I use in order to deliver the content, which is really sad, because I feel like, that's just the pressure of time and many other things and not having that space to think about it. But I feel like encouraged, and even if like empowered to go and think about, how am I meddling in the middle of this discussion? You know, my students are, they're responding to something. How can I tease that out through different tools? So can you just walk me through some tools that I can use, let's say on Canvas, through like a discussion forum, or yeah, even with a platform like Canvas or any other platforms that you might think I'm familiar with? You know, what are some tools that you've seen that allow me to like go deep and meddle with students' contributions and bring out their knowledge rather than just let them deposit their content like OneNote?
Well, no, the normally the OneNote orientates to the teacher, and they create the material that students respond to, like like the old question answer system kind of thing. Do activity 1, then go to 2, then go to 3, then go to 4. What you need is, it's how you use. It's not about the space, it's how you use the space. So it's our craft, it's our pedagogy. So it's, as I said, it's like bringing it back into the classroom and then unpacking it, not just leaving these kind of things out there. And we've always historically done that with, let's go through the answer and things like that. And it's any technology, but the gift is how you work with students. Like another example, I mean, to answer your question, you can use Padlets, you can use word clouds, you can use, like, there's so many different technologies out there, but it's when you do that, when you want to do a brainstorm at the beginning, then you'll move to a discussion forum that underpins it at a point in time, and then you'll bring in a layer of of the OneNote as the backbone of the activity. So, the sort of the gluing together, the jigsawing of it all depends on the topic, depends on the age of the students, depends on their experience, depends on how much you've done this work, how much activities you can engage with them, modeling ways so that, when they're ready to do this kind of work, they're capable of doing it. So, it takes time, because these are different ways of learning. And the thing that's most important here is the fact that these will help them be able to understand how they're learning forevermore. Like, once they leave school, they won't have the drop off that happens because the teacher's not there to tell them, and the teacher's not there to guide them. They'll be able to understand how to learn themselves, and that's our ultimate goal. We've always said we want to build students' capabilities to learn. If we just central that all the time, I think sometimes, in the midst of everything else, teachers know that that's what they do. They want to, but you hit the nail on the head. It takes time. It takes discussion to do this more complex work that sometimes we feel that we just have to get through everything. But teachers know. They know that this is really important.
Yeah. So for teachers that want to upskill in this area and actually think more deeply and thoughtfully about their pedagogy in the digital space, like, what suggestions or recommendations would you have for them to consider in terms of their professional learning?
Participate in professional learning, like as in develop your own professional learning network. So follow people on LinkedIn, get into Facebook groups and chat about stuff. Don't be a lurker, be a contributor, unpack things with people, have 24/7 conversations where you're in and out of different environments. Follow people, listen to their podcasts, listen to their, when generative AI hit, I don't know what you did. All I did was just searched everything, who was talking about what and how. I could interpret it from my own stance, but I just had to see what people were saying about it. But it was just, everything's available to you. You've got it at fingertips on your phone straight away. The power of it is there. We've had it for a long time. So but the flip, because I did a lot of research on professional learning networks, it's how you action it. So how you action the discussion, not just go and take everything. You want to have a critical conversation at points in time with people about things. So even if you see a podcast and then you share it, say, oh, this idea was presented, even if you do it in the physical, because there's the online and the physical, you've got to voice it and action it. So it's part of your learning.
I wanted to ask you this question about AI because I feel like there is a generation of teachers, even including myself, I would add myself into the mix as well. Like when all of ChatGPT came out and we just saw the power of what AI can do in that sense, I think a lot of teachers probably developed dispositions of, oh, how is this going to, result in plagiarism and more, students not writing their own work. And we need to revert back to pen to paper exams and more, teacher as a sage on the stage kind of instruction in order to get students through. And, there's all these debacles around AI, I guess. But, how should we be thinking about our attitude towards technology in a time like this?
Really an exciting time. What generative AI has done, and there hasn't been a lot of talk about this, it has been at exactly what you've said, orientated to the product. Education technology historically was introduced to focus on the process of learning. How can generative AI be part of the cognition of the child? It will become quite a personalized system of learning for every child. They'll have it in their pocket. And that's one of the biggest things, because I'll go back to what I first said. Teachers have orientated technology to them, right? So we bought interactive whiteboards, we bought computers, we said you could open it, open the file, shut it now, do this, that sort of type of thing. What this technology and what the online technology does is orientate it to the child. So we have to shift our role. We have to shift how we're thinking of using it, rather than, because they will. You can't stop it. So it's one of the first, with the online movement, first disruptors. It's been a game changer. So we have to rethink it. But if we understand the underpinnings of it, it's the fact that it has always, any technology orientates to learning. And it is a process of learning. So how can we use it as part of the learning process? Let's just get that right.
All right. I think that is just so much to unpack for myself. Even just thinking about the how, constantly I'm thinking about the what, what am I going to use? But that shouldn't be the starting point. I think it's the how. That is pedagogy, isn't it? Like in its fine form.
And that's our gift. I mean, the excitement of it at the moment is just thrilling. What students are doing and how, or what's the saying at the moment? Technology, generative AI won't replace teachers, but it will replace teachers who aren't using gen. And I prefer to say teachers to help students use, because we have to orientate it to students. We can't keep orientating technology to teachers.
What are your other last two golden rules that you would have for teachers?
Have some fun, I mean, it's not about, it's about creating the relationships. So it's not fun. I retract that, because when we say technology, the first thing people say is kids like it because it's fun, right? It's using technology is hard learning. If you're using it, it's in the process, it's hard thinking. It's sometimes putting a comment in a discussion forum is emotional. It's like, oh gosh, everyone's going to see it, So it's really important to understand that, it's about this whole dynamic of learning and learning relationships and building relationships with students and trust and opportunities, but it's their responsibility. And we often, as teachers, take the responsibility for the learning from them. So, it's important for them to have the responsibility. Creativity and experimentation and trialing and failing and all of that is all a part of learning. And, that's the nice thing, to be part of schools and to be part of classrooms. So it's relationships, experimentation. It's the joy. We've got to have the joy of being part of this with students. And the thing about generative AI, we don't have the answers. We don't have the high level of confidence or time that students do. So we have to work. We have to meddle. We've got the pedagogy. We know learning. We know that well. So we know how to harness it. But we don't have to know everything. My goodness, I don't know everything about technology, but I understand the learning process with it.
I guess it's just us being conscious of what our students' worlds are like and what they're using every day, and actually asking them about their digital practices rather than, keeping confined to ourselves and thinking, oh, they're just on Instagram. I'm sure they're doing, many other things and using many different platforms that, we do need to tap into as well to understand.
And you're the teacher, you're only one source of many sources of knowledge, but it's never knowledge, it's only information. And coming to know or coming to understand is an internalized student process. We just have to create all these different little activities and pastures around so that they come to understand something.
And that wraps up our conversation with Professor Sarah Prestridge. A huge thank you to Sarah for sharing her valuable insights and experiences with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe, rate me 5 stars, and leave a review. Don't forget to share this episode with anyone who might find it inspiring. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll dive into more fascinating topics and discussions. Until then, keep learning, stay curious, and take care. Thanks for listening to In the Classroom.